Sarah had always wondered why her father changed jobs so frequently. At 25, she'd watched him transition from insurance sales to real estate, then to financial consulting, and most recently to some vague position at a tech startup. Each career change came with the same enthusiastic explanation about new opportunities and exciting challenges ahead. What struck her as odd wasn't just the frequency of these changes, but the way her father, David, seemed to reinvent himself entirely with each new role. The insurance salesman wore conservative suits and spoke about family protection. The real estate agent drove a flashy convertible and threw around terms like market dynamics. The financial consultant adopted wire-rimmed glasses and quoted Warren Buffett at dinner. The family had moved 6 times during Sarah's childhood, always to different states. Her mother, Linda, had grown tired of the constant relocations years ago. But David always had a reasonable explanation. Better schools, lower cost of living, career advancement, the reasons varied, but they always sounded logical. It was during her visit home for Thanksgiving that Sarah first noticed something truly unsettling. She was helping her mother organize old photo albums when she found a collection of business cards rubber-banded together in a shoebox. All bore her father's name, but with different titles, companies, and even slightly different spellings of his name. David Carlson, Dave Carlson, D. Carlson. "Mom, what are these?" Sarah asked, spreading the cards across the kitchen table. Linda glanced over from the stove where she was preparing cranberry sauce. Her face tightened almost imperceptibly. "Oh, those are just your father's old business cards from his various jobs." But Sarah had counted them, over 30 cards spanning just the last decade. Some companies she'd never heard him mention. Others showed overlapping dates, suggesting he'd somehow worked for multiple firms simultaneously. That evening, while David was in his study taking what he called important business calls, Sarah decided to do some research. She started with the most recent company listed on his cards, Meridian Tech Solutions. A simple Google search yielded no results, no website, no LinkedIn page, no business registration she could find. She tried another card, then another. Half the companies seemed to exist only on paper. The ones that did have an online presence showed no record of her father's employment. The next morning, Sarah confronted her father as he prepared for another client meeting. "Dad, I've been looking at your business cards. Some of these companies, they don't seem to exist." David paused while adjusting his tie, his reflection meeting her eyes in the hallway mirror. For just a moment, something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe even fear. But it was gone so quickly, Sarah wondered if she'd imagined it. "Sweetheart, not every business has a strong online presence. Some of my clients prefer discretion, especially in financial consulting." His voice was steady, reassuring, the same tone he'd used to explain away her childhood questions about their frequent moves. But this time, Sarah wasn't satisfied with his smooth explanations. As she watched him drive away in his leased BMW, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was finally seeing the cracks in a carefully constructed facade. The man she'd called father her entire life was beginning to feel like a stranger, and she was determined to find out who he really was. Sarah spent the rest of her Thanksgiving weekend quietly investigating. She waited until her parents went to bed, then used her father's home computer to search through his email accounts. What she found made her stomach drop. There were dozens of correspondence threads with different people, each conversation showing David presenting himself as someone entirely different. To Mrs. Henderson, he was a grief counselor helping her process her husband's recent death, while subtly suggesting she invest her life insurance payout with his exclusive financial firm. To James Morrison, a recently divorced man, he posed as a relationship coach while steering him toward expensive self-help seminars that David apparently organized. The most disturbing discovery was a folder labeled Prospects, containing detailed profiles of vulnerable people: widows, recent divorcees, elderly individuals with substantial savings, and young professionals overwhelmed by student debt. Each profile included personal information, financial details, and what David called emotional triggers. Sarah's hands shook as she read through file after file. Her father wasn't just changing jobs frequently. He was systematically targeting and manipulating people for money. The next morning, she approached her mother while David was out for his morning jog. "Mom, we need to talk about Dad." Linda's coffee cup trembled slightly as she set it down. "What about him?" "I know what he's doing. The fake companies. The way he preys on people who are going through difficult times. How long have you known?" For a long moment, Linda stared out the kitchen window. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I started suspecting about 8 years ago. We'd moved to Denver, and I ran into a woman at the grocery store who recognized me from a photo in David's office. She thought I was his secretary." Linda's laugh was bitter. She'd given him $15,000 for what she believed was a surefire investment opportunity. When she tried to contact him later, the office was empty. Sarah felt the room spinning. "Why didn't you leave him?" "I tried to confront him. He convinced me it was a misunderstanding, that the woman was confused or lying. He was so persuasive, Sarah. He's always been able to make people believe whatever he wants them to believe." Linda's eyes filled with tears. "By the time I realized the pattern, I felt trapped. We'd moved so many times. I had no real friends, no support system, and I was terrified of what he might do if I tried to expose him." That afternoon, David returned from his meetings in an unusually good mood. He talked enthusiastically about a new investment opportunity he was developing, something involving cryptocurrency and elderly investors who were eager to modernize their portfolios. Sarah watched her father over dinner, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in her life. The charm, the confidence, the way he could make anyone feel like the most important person in the room. It was all part of an elaborate performance. He wasn't just a con artist. He was a predator who specialized in emotional manipulation. After dinner, while helping with dishes, David pulled Sarah aside. "I noticed you were asking your mother some questions this morning. Is everything all right?" The way he asked, casual but with an underlying edge, made Sarah's skin crawl. She realized he'd been watching, calculating, just like he did with his marks. "Just catching up on family stuff," she replied, forcing a smile. But David's eyes remained fixed on her face, studying her expression with the intensity of someone who made his living reading people. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt like she was being evaluated as a potential threat by the man who had raised her. As she prepared to leave the next morning, Sarah hugged her parents goodbye, knowing that everything had changed. She was no longer just David's daughter. She was someone who knew his secret, and that made her dangerous to him. Back in her apartment, 3 states away, Sarah couldn't focus on anything. She'd taken copies of the most damaging files from her father's computer, but now they sat on her kitchen table like a ticking bomb. Each document represented someone's trust betrayed, someone's savings stolen, someone's vulnerability exploited. She tried calling her mother several times, but Linda's responses were increasingly short and nervous. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Your father's just been working a lot lately." But Sarah could hear the strain in her voice. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, Sarah made a decision that would haunt her for months. She contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Division and submitted an anonymous tip, including copies of her father's files. She told herself she was protecting future victims, but the guilt of betraying her own father felt crushing. The investigation moved faster than she'd expected. Within a month, federal agents had tracked David's activities across multiple states. They discovered he'd been operating under various aliases for over 15 years, defrauding victims of nearly $500,000. The cryptocurrency scheme targeting elderly investors was just his latest plan. Sarah learned about the arrest from a news report. She was making breakfast when she saw her father's photo on the morning news, being led away in handcuffs from the famille. "Away from me home." The reporter mentioned that authorities were still searching for victims and that the suspect's wife was cooperating with the investigation. She immediately called her mother, who answered on the first ring. "I know it was you." Linda said quietly. He figured it out after the agents mentioned details that only someone with access to his computer would know. Sarah's heart pounded. Are you angry? No. Linda's voice was stronger than Sarah had heard it in years. I should have done it myself long ago. I was scared for so long that I forgot what it felt like to be brave. The trial lasted 3 months. Sarah attended every day, watching from the gallery as victim after victim testified about how David had destroyed their lives. Mrs. Henderson, the widow from his emails, had lost her late husband's entire life insurance policy. James Morrison, the divorced man, had borrowed against his house to pay for David's fake seminars and was now facing foreclosure. David never looked at Sarah during the proceedings, but she could feel his anger radiating across the courtroom. The charming, confident man who had raised her was gone, replaced by someone cold and calculating even in defeat. When the judge sentenced David to 12 years in federal prison, Sarah felt no satisfaction, only a deep sadness for all the people her father had hurt, and for the family that had been built on lies. After the sentencing, Linda moved back to her hometown in Ohio to live near her sister. She started working part-time at a local library and began attending therapy to process decades of emotional manipulation. For the first time in years, she seemed genuinely at peace. Sarah struggled more with the aftermath. She'd done the right thing, but it had cost her the father she thought she knew. She started her own therapy and slowly began to understand that the man she'd loved and admired had never really existed. He'd been just another one of David's elaborate personas. 6 months after the trial ended, Sarah received a letter from prison. Her father's handwriting was as neat and controlled as ever. The letter was brief. You were always too smart for your own good. I hope you can live with what you've done. She read it once, then burned it in her kitchen sink. She'd made her choice, and despite everything, she knew it was the right one. Some family bonds, she'd learned, aren't worth preserving when they're built on deception and the suffering of innocent people. Sarah kept the ashes in a small jar on her windowsill, not as a reminder of her father, but as proof that she'd found the courage to do what her mother couldn't for so many years. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling them to hurt others, even when that someone is family.
Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more interesting content coming soon.